Week 12 has no buys, and I was super excited that it felt like we were finally on board to potentially move forward at full strength with the tight end position. And then the fantasy gods reached down, plucked up Mark Andrews' legs, and said, nope, you can't have anything nice. Yo, what is going on, Headliner Nation? Week 12 could be a challenging one, and the fact that for those of you that have lost Mark Andrews, you're trying to find your way right now. And if you didn't have your tight end position backed up, you're likely going for Isaiah likely. I didn't even try that, it just came out. Or you're going for another waiver wire type of tight end. But this week could be a difficult one trying to predict who to start and who's going to have the best weeks. But my start and sit analysis here for every matchup on the slate is going to help you get to that. Now, I am going to forewarn you, we are flying through videos this week because everything that we normally have out by like Thursday morning, we now have to have out by Wednesday night. And because of that, it is putting a time crunch on what we are doing. So for this episode of the tight end start and sit analysis, there's probably going to be a couple of matchups where there's not really anything to say. So I'm not really going to say anything at all. Timestamps are down below though. If you're looking for a certain matchup, make sure you hit them. But for now, let's go ahead and hop into it. Thursday, 3 games. We start with Detroit and Green Bay. So as the cool kids would say these days, the Detroit defense is looking a little sus. And by that, I mean the pass defense. You could definitely see them getting chewed up a little bit through the air last week because they were either just tired, worn down, whatever it was. The pass defense just didn't see swarming opportunities like we did at the beginning of the season. And that's going to lead to potential big plays for Luke Musgrave. And that's really where he makes his living. A decent amount of targets last week, but for a majority of the season, he's been trying to do a lot with very little, as he's only seeing like maybe 3 or 4 targets a game. We really need to get him up past 5 targets a game. And I definitely think he could make a bigger impact in this offense than what some of these wide receivers could. And in this matchup against Detroit, where I bet Green Bay is probably going to be throwing the ball quite a bit, seeing as how they'll be missing Aaron Jones, Luke Musgrave could see some big plays, but he's completely big play dependent and outside the top 12. Sam Laporta is coming off of his worst game of the season, and a few targets that came his way, him and Jared Goff just did not seem to be on the right wavelength. And you know what? That's going to happen sometimes. Detroit as a whole did not look good for a majority of the game. It was like the last 4 minutes where they finally figured it out. But we move on, and now we get a Green Bay team that can be difficult to pass against. They've got some really good defensive backs, but Sam Laporta could end up being the difference maker in this one today. Because even though Green Bay is ranked 7th against the pass, they allow the 13th most fantasy points to the tight end position. So if Jaire Alexander and others are out there locking down the Detroit wide receivers, Sam Laporta is going to have to come up big, not only for the Lions, but for our fantasy teams this week. Logan Thomas to me is like a good hamburger, but just the hamburger, right? You got to have some fixing, some toppings on top of it to really bring it out to that full boisterous 10 out of 10 that you want from your delicious hamburger. But without those toppings, without those things, it's like, yeah, it's a good burger, but where's the upside? Like, am I really going to continue to order this? And that's what Logan Thomas is. He's that burger with no toppings because all you're getting is meat. Should probably think about how I word that next time. But for Logan Thomas, the targets are there and the receiving yards are there, but there's not a ton of receptions. There's not a ton of receiving yards, and he's not really scoring touchdowns. So really, he's like a diet version of Evan Ingram right now, except he has scored 3 times and Evan Ingram hasn't scored yet this year. It's exactly what I called it last week, and it will continue to be the same thing. Now, this matchup could lend to a decent opportunity for Logan Thomas, but unless he starts getting consistent upside, he's going to stay in yellow. The Washington defense is currently allowing the 3rd most passing yards in the NFL, and Jake Ferguson is a big part of the game plan when Dallas is actually throwing the football. When they are putting it on opponents, Jake Ferguson is seeing a decent amount of targets, but when they get more balanced, that is when you see his workload kind of decrease a little bit, and I don't want to see that, especially in such a good matchup. But this is an interdivisional game, and I absolutely can see on Thursday that Dallas is just going to want want to put it on Washington and walk out of here with a huge victory. They want to make a statement that they are one of the best teams in the NFL and one of the best teams in the NFC, because I think right now Dallas might feel like they're getting overlooked a little bit. And on Thanksgiving, with all eyes on them, especially if Detroit takes care of business in the game before, they're going to want to show everybody what's up. And Jake Ferguson is going to see some nice points from that. Over the last 6 weeks, George Kittle has been a top 8 tight end 5 times. And over the last 3 weeks, he's been inside the top 3 all 3 weeks. He has got so much ceiling at the tight end position, but I feel like people are just nervous about whether or not that big play is going to come any given week. And like I've said over and over, that's why his ceiling is so high, but we're a little bit more worried about his floor. Consistent targets have not been the name of the game, but if he makes catches and makes plays, the upside is tremendous right now. And for the Seattle Seahawks, Noah Fant continues to be the leader at the tight end position, but because he's not utilized, he's not fantasy relevant. Unfortunately, this is one of those matchups where there's not going to be a whole lot to say. Durham Smythe didn't even play the last time Miami took the field, and there's no telling whether or not he'll be ready to go this week, but they're not utilizing the tight end anyway, so it doesn't matter. And for the New York Jets, Tyler Conklin had a couple of good games over the previous 2 weeks, but then in weeks 11, basically disappeared again at that point. And they do have a couple of tight ends that are also getting out on the field and getting some snaps. So unfortunately for now, Tyler Conklin, who looked like he could be a guy down the stretch, is probably just going to go back to being a waiver wire candidate in some good matchups. But I do have to mention real quick as well with that, because of the change at the quarterback position, there is an opportunity for Tyler Conklin to get back on track. Just with there being no buys this week, I think there are some better opportunities out there instead of us risking to see what the Jets offense is going to look like with the new quarterback at the helm. Even though Atlanta's defense is allowing the 9th fewest passing yards in the NFL right now, they are allowing the 6th most fantasy points to the tight end position. And Taysom Hill isn't really playing the tight end position. We talk about it every single week, but with no Michael Thomas and the potential of having Jameis Winston underneath center this week does lead for an intriguing option for them to get Taysom Hill rolling once again. But like I tell you every single week, yes, he has top 5 upside when he is actually being utilized, but when he's not getting targets, he becomes less likely to sustain those type of performances, and the bottom absolutely falls through the floor. And it's basically the same story on the other side with the New Orleans defense as well, because they currently allow the 8th fewest passing yards in the NFL, but they allow the 11th most points to the tight end position. Now that's the tight end position, not the guy that plays in the slot or at wide receiver, but is still classified as a tight end because he lines up there every once in a while, also known as Kyle Pitts. And Kyle Pitts hasn't done anything this season, whether it be with Desmond Ridder at the start, Taylor Heineke over the last couple of weeks, and Ridder will be the starter moving forward. But I don't know how we can trust Kyle Pitts right now. The dude is continuously falling outside the top 12. I like his partner in crime a little bit better, Jonnu Smith, playing the actual tight end position in the end line, lining up like a tight end typically would. And because of that, it keeps him away from some of the better pass defenders and will give him a good opportunity in this matchup, one which at the beginning of the season, he was thriving with Desmond Ridder. We'll see if that continues against the Saints. Unfortunately, the Bengals just seem to be a huge mess right now, whether it be on the defensive or offensive side of the ball. But one area they really haven't done great at all season long is stopping tight ends. And Pat Freiermuth only had 1 target last week. But now that Matt Canada is finally gone, Pittsburgh fans rejoice. Maybe we see a little bit of a different game plan with Kenny Pickett this week. I don't know for sure, but I think we get back to basics and back to the things that work. And one thing that has always worked for Kenny Pickett is utilizing his tight end, Pat Freiermuth, going up against a Cincinnati Bengals team that can get beat by tight ends. My hope is that he gets going this week. My sleeper tight end, a guy that I was really telling everybody that we definitely should be taking a shot on with the waiver wire, is going to be Tanner Hudson from Cincinnati. And I actually think he's one of the better potentially safest tight end options that you can be picking up right now. Because over the last 3 weeks, he's really been targeted quite a bit in the offense, and he's definitely over Irv Smith Jr. now. And with Jake Browning at quarterback because Joe Burrow is done for the season, I think we're going to be looking for those high percentage completions, especially with T. Higgins still banged up. Give me some Tanner Hudson this week. I'm thinking at least 5 targets, not a huge ceiling, but enough to put him inside the top 16 tight ends. This is a really great matchup for both Evan Engram and Dalton Schultz this week. And while Dalton Schultz has been scoring all the touchdowns with some minimum target share, we have seen Evan Engram get a decent target share with no touchdowns. And I already talked about Evan Engram earlier in the video when I talked about Logan Thomas. Both of these guys are basically the same thing. They are a plain hamburger. You eat them and you're like, yep, okay, it's good, but I mean, it's not anything I'm going to order again. And wait a second. Unless you're a psycho. If you're eating your hamburgers with no toppings, you're a psycho, and I really don't have anything else to help you. But for Evan Engram, I mean, if you're good with top 14, top 16 numbers, you can start Evan Engram. But if you're looking for more ceiling, we are going to have to look elsewhere. Evan Engram just is not getting any ceiling. And because of that, there's not really anything that we can do from a fantasy standpoint to put him in there in hopes that he wins our leagues. Now for Dalton Schultz, Houston's been passing it. CJ Stroud looks tremendous, and he's looking to Dalton Schultz when they are trying to score. And because of that, he is a guy that is now having a safe floor every single week, because even if he doesn't get as many targets as some of the other tight ends in the league, he's getting those high leverage targets that are producing fantasy points. For Tampa Bay and Indy, there's not really a whole lot to talk about outside of just Cade Otton, and I've mentioned his stats a lot this season. He is getting more snaps than any tight end in football. He's just not being utilized. And for whatever reason that is, it is hampering any type of fantasy upside that we see for him. But in the good matchups this season, we have seen some success. And Indianapolis is going to be another one of those good matchups. Because right now, Indy is allowing the 5th most fantasy points to the tight end position. And Cade Otton has been known to find the end zone in those good matchups. So while from an overall volume standpoint, he might not be very safe this week, if he scores the touchdown, he'll definitely be inside the top 12 because he'll have the score along with just enough to go with it. If you need a streaming option this week, Cade Otton might be your guy. My hope was that Daniel Bellinger would get more involved in the passing game over these last couple of weeks, and it just hasn't come to fruition yet. Maybe it does with DeVito looking a lot better this past week, but I'm not really banking on it nor waiting on it. So for now, we'll keep an eye on him, but not really a whole lot to talk about. And the same probably could end up being said for Hunter Henry, but we are keeping an eye on him because prior to the break, it did feel like that they were trying to get him involved once again at the tight end position. Now, coming out of the bye, I don't know for sure who the starting quarterback is going to be. Right now, I'm assuming probably Mac Jones still, but it could be Bailey Zappi at any given moment. But hopefully Bill sat down with Bill and they got together and they said, what can we do to be more successful? And looking towards Hunter Henry, a guy that Mac Jones has a lot of connection with, is one of the things that they will do moving forward. For Carolina and Tennessee, unfortunately for both of these guys, there's not a whole lot to talk about. Hayden Hurst missed last week. Chiki Oko's been losing a lot of snaps to 2 other tight ends. And because of that, even with the potential for some decent output this season, neither of them have been fantasy viable. For the Cardinals and the Rams, I am keeping an eye on Tyler Higbee this week. Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp are both banged up. And he's going to be going up against an Arizona team that does allow the 4th fewest fantasy points to the tight end position, which is a legitimate stat because they have faced some pretty good tight ends this season. And because of that, maybe Tyler Higbee's upside is limited. But if there's no one else to throw to, even if he were to get 7, 8, 9 targets, even if they're not highly productive targets, it could still be enough to keep him in the conversation. So based on Trey McBride's numbers, he's actually in for a really big week because when you look at the back and forth, he's had a really good week, an okay week, a really good week, an okay week, a really good week, and then an okay week again. So this week would be a really good week. And I don't really believe in trying to base my fantasy analysis off of that. It's just a funny thing to look at. He does have a good opportunity going up against a defense that has given up more yards and more points than what you've come to expect from a Rams defense. So Trey McBride is still one of the #1 targets on this team and should see a decent amount once again against the Rams. David Njoku was clearly the #1 option for DTR last week, and now he gets a Broncos defense that is playing a lot better, but still allows the most passing yards and the most fantasy points to the tight end position. So if David Njoku once again this week will be the guy and will be looked at by DTR maybe 10 plus times, he's got a top 5 ceiling in this game. We are back to starting David Njoku, and we're back to feeling pretty darn good about it as well. Travis Kelce got off to a slow start against the Eagles. Didn't have a target through like the first quarter, and then finally gets a target, scores a touchdown. We feel like, all right, we're in for a big game now. Let's go, Kelce. Fumbles the ball in the red zone. Dang. And then after that, kind of disappeared again. Not a huge upside game from Travis Kelce, so hopefully we'll get him back on track this week. It's been a few weeks since we've seen that huge game where we go, that's why we drafted Travis Kelce in the first round. Hopefully it comes sooner rather than later, because quite honestly, Patrick Mahomes is doing a good job at not calling out his wide receivers in the press or postgame or anything like this. But screw those guys. We just got to get the ball to Travis Kelce as much as possible. And for Michael Mayer, I'm still not interested in it. Again, outside of one drive a few weeks ago where he doubled his output for the season and 1 touchdown, he's been useless the rest of the year. Now, Travis Kelce didn't do much against the Eagles, but maybe Dalton Kincaid can, and that's what I would love to see, and I hope we get him back on track this week as well. He's had some very good games over the last few weeks here, and he's been an important cog in a lot of teams that were dealing with injuries or issues at the tight end position. So we got to get him going in what will probably end up being another shootout with a lot of points scored, and Dalton Kincaid will probably be right in the middle of that some way, somehow. And for Dallas Goedert, he hasn't been put on the IR, but until we know fully that he's back and healthy, we just won't be moving forward with him as an option, and there's no other tight ends for the Eagles that we would look at. Last season when Mark Andrews missed time, Isaiah Likely looked pretty decent in his stead, but unfortunately it didn't happen on a consistent basis. And even when you go to like week 1 this season when Mark Andrews missed, Isaiah Likely did not make an impact. Last year when he did make that impact, there weren't a whole lot of pass catchers. There were not a whole lot of guys that Lamar Jackson could rely on anyway. So it was Isaiah Likely or bust really at that point. Now you have potentially OBJ if he ends up being all right for this week. You've got Zay Flowers. You've got Nelson Aguilar. You've got other guys in the system that you can trust to get the ball out too. And because of that, Isaiah Likely does not carry the same upside that we have seen. He's a lot of risk for me this week. And even though this matchup could end up being okay for him, I'm just not willing to bet it. And I would rather probably look for a safer play. But if you find yourself chasing points and you say, I just got to risk it for the biscuit because I got to score as much as possible, then it would be okay to go with Isaiah Likely. Now, Gerald Everett missed this past week, and Donald Parham did not have that bad of a game, but Donald Parham is not fantasy viable unless Gerald Everett misses. So keep an eye on it this week. If for some reason Gerald Everett does miss, then Donald Parham kind of falls into the same area that what Isaiah Likely would as well, where, yep, you might get a decent output, but it might be a little bit too risky, and I would look for safer options. Monday Night Football is going to bring my Manscaped must-watch matchup of the week. Head on over to manscaped.com. If you're trying to look for some Christmas ideas, manscaped.com has a ton of new products on the shelf that you may want to try out or gift to that special somebody. Make sure that you use code word headliners at checkout, though. When you do, 20% off your entire order and free shipping. Now for Cole Kmet, he brings a little bit of risk because the Bears offense as a whole brings a little bit of risk. DJ Moore is really the guy for Justin Fields, and Cole Kmet is after that, but we know from his performances that you could get top 5 tight end Cole Kmet one week and bottom 15 Cole Kmet the other week, whereas just no telling what week Cole Kmet is going to end up being the guy. This week could end up being one of those weeks. I do like this potential matchup for him, but I just don't love how it's such a roller coaster to try and figure out when to start him. And for the Chicago Bears, they give up the 4th most fantasy points to the tight end position. So I'm going to make this easy squeezy, lemon peasy. TJ Hawkinson will probably be my tight end 1 this week. Yo, Headliner Nation, I know this one went a little bit quicker than what some of the other tight end shows have had, but really, we got to get through a lot of information this week, so I needed to try and speed it up a little bit. But make sure that if you have any questions after this, that you check out the rankings that will be dropping on Wednesday this week and not Thursday. But for now, I'm going to get out of here. Peace out. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll catch you all on the next episode. of the fantasy headliners.
I'm a headliner.